Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Data Unchained. I'm your host, Molly Presley. If you're new to this show, let me tell you just a little bit about what Data Unchained is about. As you think back over the last 20 or 30 decades, whether you're in the IT space or maybe in a data generating business, which I think we all are, most data infrastructures were built around a mainframe, a data center where the humans, the machines, the applications, the storage systems all were co-located in a single environment. Over the last 20 or 30 years, as the cloud became much more common, as sensor generated and edge data became more common, we've begun to deal with the generation of a lot more data in distributed and decentralized areas. And now there's really a push, especially with the advent of AI, to take advantage of those data sets. This podcast delves into some of the challenges as well as the opportunities and some of the solutions around using decentralized data more effectively in your organization. Today's guest is RJ Kedziora. He is the CEO and co-founder of Estenda Solutions. RJ, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
And we'll be talking about healthcare, just to give folks who are listening an idea of what the general topic is today. But before we dive into that, maybe tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. And buckle up. Healthcare and data is an interesting challenge.
A loaded topic.
Loaded topic. I've been fortunate through my life. I've always been involved in computers, technology, software, even way back in high school, even prior to that, actually, in grade school. My parents were able to get me an IBM PC Junior and started playing with that and loved playing games, but then was also very fascinated by what I could do with the computers and technologies. So started programming at a very early age.
That seems to be a thing that CEOs and like the people who are entrepreneurial seem to do. It seems like every entrepreneur in this space I know started coding on one of those early machines.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was always like, oh, what next? What next? What next was always the question. And early 90s, got a degree in computer science. And as we're all fascinated by AI, I was way back then. Going into college, my goal was to get a PhD in AI. But then as paths diverge, I got a job offer and was like, oh, do I take on a lot more debt or do I go out in the world and start working? So I did sort of shift at that point and went out into the world, started working software development, project manager, program management, and then started my own company, Estenda, in 2003 with a good friend, Drew. So been working in healthcare for many a year now, but huge advocate of the idea of data and how we can use it to improve. I'm a competitive age group triathlete. I don't win any triathlons, but in my age group I do pretty well usually. And a lot of that is around
finishing says a lot, honestly.
Finishing is a goal. Finishing is admirable. It doesn't have to be a triathlon, a 5K. Getting off the couch and out there. As I am out there and on these courses and do these races, I'm always looking to find that person that's a 70-year-old, that 80-year-old person that's out there doing it. And they're like, oh, yeah, but it took me so long. But you just did a 5K, a triathlon, yes, or a race. You're not sitting on the couch. So kudos to you. It's awesome out there. And even the person, I've done marathons over the years and stuff. And as someone completes a marathon in 6 hours, I think that's a lot harder. I can run faster, but it's a lot harder to be out there for 6 hours.
That's a long time to be on the course.
To everybody
for
out
sure.
there doing those things.
Absolutely. I'm an ultra runner, so I'm kind of in the same category. Probably not even competitive at my age group, but I can do them, and that's all I'm happy about.
But you're out there and doing it, and it's funny. Just as a quick aside, one of the women that works with me does it in ultra marathons too. And she thinks I'm crazy for doing the triathlons, and I think she's a little crazy for doing the ultra marathon. So I'll put you in that bucket. I just can't see you running for that long, but I'll do a triathlon.
I do it on trails, which keeps it a little bit more interesting. It's more difficult, but it's more interesting too.
Nice.
More difficult physically anyway, probably not mentally. All right, cool. So let's switch over and talk about Estenda Solutions. You've been in business now for just north of 22 years. What do you do?
What do I do? Let me start at the beginning. We solve, realistically, data challenges in digital healthcare. So Estenda is a consulting organization focused on custom software development, data, and AI projects. And digital health is a very wide field. It encompasses a lot of things. We really focus on R&D types of projects that are working on improving patient health and wellness. So as we work with, say, a medical device company, and they have data coming off of their device, if it's a new type of device, how do we understand that data and make use of it? If it's a device that's been on the market for a while, like a continuous glucose meter or a blood pressure cuff, how do we make new use of that data? How do we find new patterns and trends in that information to help patient wellness? So systems that we're providing, that we're helping our customers generate, are either used by clinicians, other healthcare professionals, sometimes actual patients are using them, but a lot of research. I mentioned that ultra runner, that Stephanie that works for her. She's a PhD researcher, has been doing this for longer than I have, and just great insights from that R&D research perspective, because it's one thing for the technologists and even a doctor to say, hey, this we think this works. You really have to test it to make sure it works in clinical trials. So we got our started in digital health and just the idea of helping others.
And how does that work when you, let's say, the glucose meter case study, is that something you partner with the device manufacturer to get the data? Do they have APIs or of some sort or a SaaS tool? Like, how do you get access to the data, or is it done at the patient level?
It's a combination of all of those, depending on the particular group party that we're helping with. So in some cases, we'll work directly with the manufacturer of the device, and then as we develop, say, a mobile health application, we can get access to that data through like the Bluetooth connectivity to have that real time in focus. In others, as we're helping a third party provider get access to that the glucose information, it's more of an API based approach. So it really depends on who's involved and who has access to that information. In some cases, we go old school. It's like, here's our database. See if you can find this information. That's always been interesting over the years.
And who is your customer typically? I know you said it was research, but is it like the pharma companies who are doing research? Is like, at what level? Is it government? Who is it ultimately who's using this data?
We have some customers in each of these categories. So we do extensive work with the Indian Health Services, which is responsible for the native population here in the United States. We have a diabetic retinopathy surveillance program, and I can explain that in a minute if you're interested. Some large Fortune 50 medical device companies, but then also startups developing their own solutions. And then through that, we wind up partnering and working with the hospitals, doctors, primary care clinics, community health centers to help implement those solutions. So as we're working with, say, a startup developing new software to help patients improve their health, you want that to be part of the clinical workflow. So then we have to integrate that system in with the EMR.
Okay.
Because if it doesn't exist in the clinician's workflow, it doesn't exist. There's an amount of it.
And it seems like typically end users such as clinicians or specialists in any field don't particularly like to change their workflow. You kind of have to bring the data to what they're used to.
Absolutely. I don't think anybody really appreciates changing their workflow, but think about when you've gone and seen your primary care health provider, you might be lucky if you get 5-10 minutes with that individual, and then they're just going to bounce to the next office. So if they're in the visit where they're constantly have to switch between systems and log in multiple times, it's just not going to work very well.
Absolutely. So tell me just a little bit. I think you said it was the diabetic retinopathy. I think I probably butchered that a little bit, but tell me a little bit about what that is.
It is a mouthful. So diabetes is a chronic condition, and it affects the microvascular, small blood vessels in your body. And one of the things that it can do is cause diabetic retinopathy, which is the leading cause of preventable blindness. And so with this system, it's a telesurveillance system. So at various community health centers, tribal healthcare facilities throughout the US, we have cameras set up to take a photo of the back of your eye, the retina of your eye, and then it goes to a reading center where we can evaluate if you have any level of disease. And if you do, then get you to the proper care and treatment such that we can make a difference in your quality of life and help prevent that blindness. So it's been a program going for 20 plus years now. So being able to say we make an impact in the world is a nice thing to be able to say when you go to sleep at night. And as we think about the data aspects of that, it's like, okay, one thing, it's really good to have that photo of the retina and be able to see what's going on. But then we can combine it with the medical record information to get more of a background and understanding of that individual's health history to make better recommendations.
Very cool. I love that. And yes, feeling like you did something that made a difference is definitely a noble thing in IT, where sometimes you just feel like you're dealing with zeros and ones and it's hard to see the outcome. So that's super cool. So tell me, I mean, this is a massive topic, but I'm going to just ask the question and let you take it wherever you want to. So challenges in healthcare data, and maybe specific to your area, and maybe some of the newer, most urgent things that you're trying to deal with. Maybe we can start to touch on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We could be here for hours talking about data in healthcare. But what I find fascinating is it's the last industry to really embrace the idea of data. There's plenty of technology in healthcare. You think about your MRIs, your X-ray systems, even as we're taking digital photos of the retina of the eye. Extensive, very powerful technology, but data is very recent. Only in 2009 did EMRs really start proliferating throughout the healthcare industry. Prior to that, most places just had everything on paper, and if it's on paper, it might as well not exist. Like, it's just really hard to use that. And what I still find fascinating to this day, we're sitting here in 2025, and I went to a healthcare conference a few months ago. There's still probably a dozen vendors out there that are focused on faxing information around in healthcare. And they are advancing. So now as the faxing is electronic, not just paper, but the true paper faxes still exist. And my wife worked with a primary care provider a while ago. Still got faxes every day, which then someone had to physically scan into the system. So trying to get to that information is really powerful. And it's gotten better, the exchange of information in the industry, but it still has extreme challenges. They're not necessarily technological challenges. They're more around people and process. So there are methods to exchange data in the industry. In the early 90s through the 2000s, and it's still in use today, we had a standard called HL7, which was a messaging-based protocol to push data around. Very difficult to read, interpret what was in there. You really had to understand the standard. More recently, probably in the last 10 years, there's what's called the FHIR API protocols. FHIR stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, FHIR. And that's the current standard that the government, ONC, other organizations are really pushing as the standards for exchanging information. But even if you can get access to those APIs, which is great, you have two challenges. One, where is that API? How do I get access to it? And all the permissioning that's required, because healthcare data is sensitive. But now that you have access to the data, you have to understand the semantics and be able to understand that data. Because while FHIR is a standard, and it is how individuals implement that standard varies significantly from institution, from EMR to EMR. Epic is perhaps the biggest, it is the biggest EMR vendor here in the US. But if you look at one Epic implementation, it allows that individual practice, that hospital, to make changes, to customize it to their practice. So just because one group has Epic, another Epic implementation can look completely different. And as an easy example, think of blood pressure. You have two numbers, 120/80, systolic, diastolic, two values. So if I get a data reading that says BP for blood pressure, is it both values and commonly used, a slash as differentiating those, or is it really just one of those numbers, and then the second number is in a different field? So something most people think is really simple gets complicated really fast, and we're just talking about one reading as part of a medical visit, let alone the lab values, the medications you might be on, procedures and diagnoses that have been made over time. Gets incredibly complicated.
So this FHIR standard, just as an example, who's responsible for creating that?
It's tied back to the HL7 organization. It's an international standard who's set up how that actually works and how you should use it. But then, like many things, it's the nuances of how you implement it between that. There's, for instance, how you represent lab data. There's different people interpret it different ways in the structure within that FHIR API method, how you actually code it in there. So it's even trying to understand where is this data coded within the FHIR standard, which makes it very interesting. So, and that's why I think while the technology exists, it's very much a people and process challenge of being able to truly understand this data as you go between different institutions.
And what's driving a standards committee like that to evolve and make changes? Are they driven by governments, or are they being driven by big pharmaceutical companies, big enterprise? Is it, you and I talked about biases in data. Are there kind of groups that are driving, advocating for certain groups of people? How does that move to the next standard, and how does it maybe accelerate to things on topics like the importance of exchanging data?
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of organizations that are advocating for it. The government absolutely is pushing for it. National societies are pushing for it. Patient organizations, it's my data. I want to be able to access that. That's incredibly difficult to do. There are laws on the books, and they're getting better over time. There are now laws on the book that prevent information blocking. So you as an individual have the right to go to your healthcare provider and say, send me my data electronically. And they have to do that within a reasonable amount of time without charging you for that. A lot of people don't know that. And then how is that data actually transmitted and provided to you is a whole other ballgame. Some might just send you a flat text file of various information. Others might send you a PDF. So then how do you make use of that data? Startup organizations, they're pushing for this access because there's so much data that is trapped in these medical record systems. We need to be able to get it out to be able to make use of it.
So I'm going to switch to kind of a different extreme, but the idea of AI in healthcare, where is it being used today? Are doctors using it? Is it mostly R&D? Where do you feel like it's most deployed today?
There's two, in terms of AI, two worlds. One I think of sort of as the old school machine learning, still very much a hot topic these days, but people tend to forget about the machine learning aspects of it. And it's used extensively in analyzing images and gathering information from those images. It's we use machine learning with the diabetic retinopathy project in terms of looking at those images and understanding what's going on. Very much accepted technology. The computers, the AI can detect things that you and I cannot, which is always fascinating. You and I get tired. If you're supposed to sit down in front of a computer and examine 100 images, you're going to start getting tired. You're human, whereas the computer technology doesn't. And then as we look forward now, large language models, the ChatGPTs of the world, we need to embrace them more and more. But the first use cases in healthcare today are very low risk areas. ambient listening is being picked up very quickly and being implemented across the industry. And as you and I might use GoToMeeting or Teams or any of these various platforms that take notes for you, that's the same thing. So as you go into a doctor's office and have your visit, it's going to be listening in the background and document the information for that provider for you. Instead of having the doctor sit there and type away at their computer and not look at you and not pay attention to you and probably get frustrated trying to figure out where do I click that next little icon, the computer can listen in the background and provide those notes. So that's probably the biggest AI use case being adopted by the industry pretty much across the board. Secondarily, then you get into more administrative types of tasks of looking at how do we take those notes and translate it into billing. There's a very structured billing process in healthcare. So again, very low risk from that perspective. And then on the cutting edge now is the idea of how do we enhance care and treatment with these technologies. There are extensive documentation out there around the idea of medical mistakes that humans are making. Again, we're tired, we're fallible. How do we use this technology to enhance that experience? Unfortunately in my family, there's a history of lupus, which is a rare, hard to diagnose autoimmune disease. Typically takes 7 years to diagnose that. Well, if you can use the power of technology to diagnose that faster, then that individual is going to get treatment much more quickly. It's being used to identify medications for rare diseases. Pharmaceutical companies do make investments in the areas of rare disease, but the business case is a lot harder to make. So whereas there may only be a few people globally that have this issue, it doesn't make sense to spend literally billions of dollars to bring a new drug to market. So how can we use AI to find areas where an existing drug on market may be able to make an impact on that rare disease? And it's slowly expanding. I think with AI, it's been proven multiple times now, it does pretty good with medical research, diagnostics, care and treatment advice. I would not use, as a ChatGPT or Claude, any of the sort of the top tier ones, as my only method of diagnosing my medical condition. They are not foolproof. They were not designed for medical use. But as a first round to get an opinion, get feedback, and then go talk to your doctor, great use case. And what I'm looking forward to is now you have this ambient listening in the room. The computer understands what's happening. It has access to your medical records, all of that information that's embedded in there. And it understands research and the current science. An often quoted number in the medical world is that it takes 17 years for new research to get into routine clinical practice. It takes time. But the computer, the technology, the AI can be aware of all of that and what's new and what's out there and can put those things together and now offer new and interesting insights to that clinician, to the patient. At some point in the relatively near future, in my opinion, it's going to be irresponsible to not use the AI in medical care. I don't think there's a lot of fear of AI replacing people. I don't think AI is going to replace the doctors or the healthcare professionals. It's going to help them. It's going to augment their capabilities to be able to do better.
There is so much data out there now, and I think you used the term when we were chatting before about data overload. Do you think AI is kind of part of that solution, that way you don't have to go search, manually all the potential new drugs and that kind of thing? Or are there other approaches that are in play on addressing this data overload? I mean, I just imagine a diabetic patient that maybe has the continuous meters in them, maybe have had the ocular tests and they've been to 6 doctors and there's new treatments. How do doctors overcome this data overload? And maybe it's not just physicians, it's others probably as well.
It's a great question too, because I started using what's called a Muse headband that monitors the EEG brainwaves. And
I presume that's on your hand, right? You have an Aura ring or something too?
I have the Aura ring on, yes, track all of my activities, my heart rate, it's all sorts of numbers, which is fascinating. I do love seeing those numbers, but it's interesting because I'll wake up one morning and be like, "You're ready to go." And I'm like, yeah, no, I did a really hard leg workout tomorrow and I'm having trouble
I don't
walking.
always agree. Yeah.
It doesn't know that.
Yeah.
But, as I started wearing this Muse headband, and it does EEG, monitoring your brain waves, and it's designed, one, to help you fall asleep better and has training around how to meditate better and everything like that. Imagine if I bring that to my physician and say, hey, what do you think of this? They're not going to, most physicians, I won't say all, most aren't going to have any idea of what to do with that data because it is so new on the market. I've worn various devices too recently that look at how much I sweat and the elements of that sweat to be able to rehydrate better. Imagine bringing that to my physician and be like, is this good? They're
Exactly.
Just, they're not equipped to deal with that
information, but it's hard to measure what to do with it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But that's where the AI comes in. It's allowing for much more personalized medicine. It's targeting me as an individual, as a patient, let alone the clinician, the provider. If I'm, as a healthy individual, a lucky healthy individual, I do go to the doctor once a year for my annual physical. But I also find that sort of laughable. I'm like, okay, I know I'm really helpful. I'm here to check and make sure there's nothing that I'm just not aware of, get my lab tests done, which is nice. But if I'm someone who's sick and you're going once a month, you're still only seeing that physician for maybe 10, 15 minutes if you're lucky. So much of your health happens outside of those four walls of the doctor. What do you do as an individual? Makes so much the world of a difference. We were talking about the CGMs, continuous glucose monitoring for patients with diabetes. These companies now have the same type of technology for people without diabetes. And so I wore these, I got to play with these devices and stuff like that. And there was just this powerful teaching moment. So as I develop these systems, I know the science behind it. And I know if I eat and then go walk, I'm going to be better off as an individual. The food that I eat is going to have less of an impact on my body. My blood glucose levels aren't going to go up as high. So I ran an experiment, just me. I sat down and had a meal and then sat down on a couch and watched those numbers go up and come down. Again, I'm normal, so it's like that's what you expect to see. The next night I ate the same meal and then went for a walk afterwards. 10 minutes. Nothing major, nothing difficult. I didn't go run, swim, bike. I didn't do an ultra marathon. Walked for 10 minutes. And you could visibly see the difference that made in how my body processed that food and how it had an impact on blood glucose. So it's powerful technology to understand what's happening within our bodies and how we can make a difference in improving our own health in very little ways.
Absolutely. And I wear an Oura ring too, so I'm familiar with that technology. There is, and I'm certain there's AI behind this where they're analyzing data. If you dig deep enough, even in their apps, it will tell you, here's some things to think about on what you're seeing on your numbers, which is pretty cool for self-serve human use of these devices. But kind of the industry at large, as they're starting to tackle these challenges and wanting to ingest this data, maybe taking certain types of data and training it into private language models. Is that a place where Estenda Solutions is getting involved in helping? How is that occurring? Is it Aura on their own can ingest my data, but they can't share it with anyone? Can you just share some of your insights there?
Yeah, absolutely. So it obviously varies depending on vendor and what they're doing and how you may want to make use of that data. So HIPAA is a huge concern in the world of healthcare space. And what's fascinating by that is just because there's medical information involved, such as the Oura Ring or your Apple Watch, does not mean that that organization is bound by HIPAA. HIPAA is very much a medical professional, healthcare providing a healthcare related service. So HIPAA might not apply to a lot of these vendors, but there are still privacy regulations around the use of that information. The FTC very much looks after that. So that's the first thing to note as you use these devices and you're making your information available. there are concerns in the industry as more and more of these devices proliferate out in the world. And if the insurance companies get a hold of this information, do they then start adjusting your premiums? So in everything we do, regardless of whether it's directly related to healthcare and HIPAA applies or not, it's, okay, how do we secure this data and information and give patients, the individual owners of that data, the rights to share it with individuals, kind of thing. Definitely there's this idea buried in user agreements and stuff like that. The idea that the vendor is going to be able to use this data and make use of this data. When they do that, as a best practice, it is anonymized, such that then you don't know whose information is being used to then train the AI systems. One of the things we've seen in the world of diabetes is I eat a blueberry or a banana and you eat a blueberry and banana. We're going to process that very differently. It's going to have a different impact on our body. But using those AI systems, they've been able to understand that there are differentiated subgroups of people. So, and then that helps guide additional treatment algorithms around, okay, these different food groups and these different categories of people, which is just fascinating. You and I couldn't look at that amount of data and understand and break out those different subgroups of information, but the technology can. So in all of this, as we work with these vendors, it's like, okay, what are the data governance processes in place, the data agreements between the different parties? How do we protect that data? How do we exchange the information? How do we anonymize it, to make it useful? Who owns it? Everyone sort of agrees to the idea that the patient, the individual user, owns the data, but then once it's anonymized, that opens up a lot more. You do see some the bigger health institutions out there anonymizing that data and reselling it as to make money, which I understand. You need to stay in business, but it's my data, so I do want a greater say in how it's used across the industry. A frequent use case for us is integrating a digital health application in with a medical record to, one, make it part of that clinical workflow, but two, also to bring all of that data together. So understanding what medications you're on, along with your heart rate. So do you have cardiac issues? You want to be able to have a much broader perspective of what's going on with that individual patient's health and wellness. And then, can I generate advice and guidelines to the patient? And then when you go to the clinician, can we generate new advice, guidance for the clinician, or even for the patient? Ask these questions. Here's the thing that you should make sure should be covered. So, wide variety of ways we use that data.
Are there any things as you look towards the next year or two that are on the horizon that the industry and your company are getting ready for? And that could be standards, technology, regulations, anything big and new on the horizon?
I'd love to say I look forward to the universal access of data across all these platforms, and unfortunately, it's not going to happen. I think that will
You
continue.
would look forward to that, but maybe not.
I look forward to that, but that's a little farther in the future, kind of thing. There's it's called TEFCA, TEFCA. It's a new government initiative. It's a couple years old now, but it's creating a directory of resources in hospitals across the market, such that make it easier to find this information, easier to integrate with the information. So we're definitely looking forward to that, being able to share information, through these networks. I think there's also somewhat, hey, let's invent a new way to share data again. It's like, well, we have a method. No, let's invent a new one. So there is some of that going on, but I think that has strong potential. It's being, still backed by the government, which is always good. Obviously, AI. AI is making just such a huge impact across the industry. We were fortunate to just get a small business innovative research grant for the development of a olfactory test database. olfactory smell testing. The idea of smell testing hasn't got a lot of traction until COVID, when a whole bunch of people lost their sense of smell. So the loss of your sense of smell could be an indicator of serious things, brain injuries, concussions, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. Not one-to-one, like, oh, you lose your sense of smell, you have these issues. It might be an indicator. We're learning a lot in the industry. But there is no single repository of this smell test data out there to learn from, to aggregate information. So we're going to create one, which is going to be fascinating to have all that information. But we're going to put on top of it what I'm thinking of as conversational analytics. So you'll be able to talk to it. So just like you talk to ChatGPT and the other ones now kind of thing to generate, some marketing material, LinkedIn posting, something like that, you're now going to be able to talk to this data and try and tease out information, which I think is a powerful use case, because you're not going to have to learn and understand SQL or R or some, SAS or whatever programming language to be able to get to that data. You just be able to talk to it, have a conversation with it, and discover interesting things, which then leads to additional research. So I think that's going to be a growing phenomenon that we see in the industry of just how do we empower a wider group of people to have access to information.
This podcast has had quite a few guests from the biotech, life sciences space. We have a pretty good following there. If our listeners are listening to this podcast and thinking, I think I could, probably leverage whether it's your knowledge, RJ, or kind of Estenda's broader team, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Two things that I always point people to: estenda.com, our website, ESTNDA, or our LinkedIn page. Like many others, we try and push out a lot of information, share what we're learning and understanding and doing in the industry to the benefit of others. That idea of helping, that's so embedded in the types of projects we take on. It's like, how else can we do that? It's embedded in our developers' philosophy. It's like, as you're writing code, you're not writing code for yourself. It's like you're writing code to help others. But we even think of it as like, okay, how do we write code to help the tester test it more efficiently or make the next update? So it's really embedded in everything we do. And we just love having these conversations. It doesn't always lead to projects, but I've mentored numerous startups, talked to a lot of startups, R&D leaders in various companies, bounce ideas around, and if they lead to a project, great. If not, I had a really fun conversation. So.
Yeah, building the network is always good, especially in the area of work that you all have. And do you do anything like user community meetings, or are there meetups that happen at events? Is there anything else like that where you all are engaged?
I do try, and I'm in the greater Philadelphia area, so I do try and get out to their local network meetings. I go to a bunch of the health and HIMSS conference, Vive conference, some of the bigger ones in the industry these days, where I practice serendipity. I walk around and just talk to as many people as I can, which is always fun. Just hop into a line and get coffee and start chatting with people to see what's going on.
Perfect. Modeling that here by jumping on our podcast too. RJ, thank you for joining today's episode. Really interesting conversation. I definitely feel like you and your team have a wealth of both kind of the policy and practicality as well as the technology experience. So I definitely encourage our listeners, if this is your area, it might be an interesting conversation to pursue with RJ. Thanks for joining Data Unchained. Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.